أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So last week we covered the prohibited times of Salah, and we also discovered, but we covered the makruh times of Salah, right? So if anybody can recall, how many times throughout the day is it prohibited to pray Salah? Three times, right? So what was the first?
At sunset, at sunrise.
Sunrise, right? It's prohibited to pray at sunrise. And what was the second one? Istiwa, right? Istiwa is when the sun is at its highest point, right?
It's called Zawal?
Zawal is when it starts to move down.
Oh, okay.
Zawal is when it starts to move down. When it's at its highest point, that is known as istiwa, right? And it is there for about 10 minutes. So for that 10 minutes, it is haram to pray at that time, any salah, right? And what was the third one? Sunset, right? So it's simple. Sunrise, istiwa, when the sun is at its highest point. And the third one is sunset, right?
No, sunset, we are not clear, because sunset, Maghrib is they started.
Yes, that last week I mentioned there is a certain time where you can still pray your Asr Salat, which is when the rays of the sun change the color, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the rays of the sun become sort of a reddish type of color. So from that moment until sunset, you cannot pray any Salah. The only exception that the scholars make is that if you haven't prayed Asr yet, you could pray Asr at that time. That's the only exception. You understand? Besides that, you can't pray any other Salah. That's the only exception. Or if you haven't prayed Asr, you could pray Asr at that time, right? So these are the three times. We also discussed you cannot pray Qada, you cannot pray any form of Salat, it will not count, right? Even if you start your Qada, even if you, for example, you do Sajda Tilawat, during these three times it won't count, right? You're going to have to do it at another time, right? Outside of these three times, right? And how many makruh times were there that we discussed? No, the
Two.
haram times were three, the makruh times were two, right? So what were the two makruh times? Right, one of them is after you pray your Fajr until sunset, or at the time where Ishraq comes in, right?
Sunrise, you mean?
Yeah, sunrise pretty much. Right, that's a makruh time to pray. And what was the second time that we discussed? After Asr, right? After Asr until
Sunset is completed.
sunset, right? After performing Asr, yes. After you perform your Fajr and after you perform your Asr, right? It is makruh to pray any salat during that time, any type of nafil or whatnot. Last week I didn't mention the reasoning. There's a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he mentions that you can't pray at these three times, specifically in terms of when the sun is rising. He says you don't pray salat at that time, at sunrise, because Rasulullah says فَإِنَّ الشَّمْسَ تَطْلُعُ بَيْنَ قَرِّي الشَّيْطَانِ, that the sun rises between the two horns of shaitan. That's what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith. Well, the commentators of hadith, they mentioned that at this time shaitan situates himself, you could say, on top of the sun. The scholars of hadith, when they commentate on this hadith, this is what they mention. So that anybody who prays during this time, you could say it is such that they are praying towards shaitan. Another reason that the scholars mention is that these three times are when those who worship the sun, this is the time that they worship the sun, when the sun is rising, when it's at its highest point, and during sunset. So these are some of the reasons that scholars mentioned, their wisdoms behind why we shouldn't pray at these times. We're not allowed to pray at these times, right? So that covered the prohibited times and the makruh times of Salat. Today we're going to discuss the Mustahabb times of Salat, the preferred times of Salat, which portion of the day or which portion of the Salat is the best time to pray that certain Salat. So the first Salat we'll begin with is Fajr. Some of these, there's a difference of opinion amongst the different madhabs, right? So you have Mustahabb times of Salat. The first one is Fajr. So the Mustahabb is when the light in the horizon it spreads considerably. Right, when the light begins to spread a little bit, this is known in the Arabic language as isfar. Isfar literally means to shine, right? So according to the Hanafi madhab, this will be the Mustahabb time to pray Fajr. And they calculate this as you would be able to pray Fajr Salat, and in the Salat, you'd be able to recite about 40 to 50 ayat. So in the Fajr Salat, you'd be able to recite 40, 50 ayat. After completing the Salat, if you have to repeat it, you can repeat it, and you can also recite 40, 50 ayat, and you could still have time left after that. So that is how they calculate this time. When the light in the horizon spreads considerably, so you'll calculate that. So say for example, how long would it take for me to read my Fajr and read 40, 50 ayat in my Fajr Salat? So say for example, 15 minutes. So 15 minutes, and I'm also able to repeat it with the same amount of ayat. So I add another 15 minutes, so that's 30 minutes, and there's still some time left. So say for example 5-10 minutes, right? So 35-40 minutes before sunrise, according to the Hanafi madhab, is the ideal time to pray the Fajr Salat, right? According to the other three madhahib, you pray it earlier, right? When it's still dark and the light really hasn't really spread that much, you pray it at that time. And that time is known as ghalas, right? So I'll just hand it over here. This is known as isfar, right? When you're praying at a time where there is a considerable amount of light in the horizon. Now in regards to dhuhr, this is agreed upon in all four of the madhahib, that it is delayed during the summer until the heat rays elapse. What does this mean? Meaning at the summer, there's a certain time where there's severe heat, right? You could say it's about 10 to 2 o'clock, right? So the Mustahabb time, it could vary. The Mustahabb time would be to delay dhuhr until the extreme heat has cooled down a little bit, right? The heat has cooled down a little bit. So that would be Mustahabb during the days of summer. In the days of winter, it would be prayed in the beginning time. And this can be derived from a hadith. The hadith is mentioned in Bukhari. Right? I'll discuss it in a few times during. Right, the hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, "Abridu bil-dhuhr, فَإِنَّ شِدَّةَ الْحَرِّ مِنْ فَيْحِ جَهَنَّمْ." He says to delay dhuhr until the extreme heat cools down, because the severity of the heat is actually from Jahannam. That's what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the hadith, right? Another point I like to add on is actually another hadith Rasulullah said. It doesn't really have anything to do with dhuhr salat. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned in a hadith that Jahannam complained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding the severe heat of Jahannam. So it complained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Jahannam permission to take 2 breaths. It allowed it to exhale and it allowed it to inhale. So Rasulullah says when Jahannam inhales, when it takes a breath in, then that is the winter season. That is during the winter time. That is when the weather gets cold. And when Jahannam exhales, it lets a breath out. That is during the summertime when there is severe heat. Right? Rasulullah mentions this in a hadith. So that covers Fajr and Dhuhr. Next is Asr. So Asr will be delayed until such a time wherein if one wants to offer, if one were to offer nafal, you're not allowed to, it's makruh to offer nafal after you pray Asr. But just to show the calculation of when should you delay it until, they say it should be delayed until such a time wherein if a person were to pray nafal, he would be able to pray it before the Maghrib Salat will come in. And this is, of course, before the makruh time, right? When the rays of the sun become red, right? Okay, again, it's delayed until such a time wherein if one wants to offer nafil, then he can offer the nafil prayer. Next salat will be Maghrib, and this is also agreed upon that Maghrib, the Mustahabb time is that it is offered immediately after sunset. Right? It is makruh to delay it until such a time where the stars begin to appear on the horizon. Maghrib is straightforward. Right? And the last salat would be Aisha. This also varies. It's prayed early in summer because it comes in really late during the summertime. So, due to that reason, it's Mustahabb to offer it early during the summer, and it's delayed during the winter. Right? Again, for Isha Salat, you pray it early during the summer season. During the winter season, you will it's prayed early during the summer, and you will delay it until the winter, or during the winter. What else? Yes, this is very important. This next point that I'm going to mention, I see this happening a lot. People don't, either they don't know or they just don't really give it importance. It is makruh to pray during the khutbah. Not only is it makruh to pray, we have to understand that it is wajib to listen to the khutbah, listen attentively to the khutbah, which means it is makruh tahrimi to talk, to be on your phone. Some people offer itr when the khutbah is going on, that is makruh tahrimi. Anything besides listening to the khutbah, any action besides listening attentively to the khutbah is makruh tahrimi. Who's praying, talking, a lot of people, I see them, they're talking during the khutbah, or they're on their phone during the khutbah, or a person is giving out itr during the khutbah, everybody around him is just passing around the itr. So now what do you do if somebody talks to you? You just don't reply.
You talking about during Jummah?
The khutbah, the Arabic khutbah. And not the English bayan that goes on.
No, but
for
Jummah prayer you're talking about, right?
For Jummah prayer, yes. And in regards to it being makruh to pray, the scholars mention even, for example, the khutbah that is read during nikah, even in that. You could say even during the khutbah read in their Eid salat, right? It's makruh for a person to pray. The person should and has to listen attentively. When does a person know that, okay, now the khutbah is going, now the khutbah is starting, I can't talk? When the imam sits on the minbar. When the imam comes and he sits on the minbar, from that moment until salat starts, you cannot talk. So now the question comes that when the imam sits on the minbar, the muazzin goes and gives the second adhan. So do you reply to the second adhan? So the scholars say no, you don't reply to the second adhan. However, if you didn't get a chance, if you weren't here for the first adhan and you didn't get to reply to the first adhan, then you could reply to the second adhan. Again, I'll repeat it. You don't reply to the second adhan. However, if you weren't here for the first adhan and you didn't get a chance to reply to it, then you can reply to the second adhan. Understand? So these are the rules in regards to listening to the khutbah. We have to make sure that we listen attentively, we don't talk, we're not on our phones, we're not praying, our salat. Also in the khutbah, when the portion, the imam recites the ayat, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. In the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, "O you who believe, send salat on Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam." So even this, you're not supposed to say this audibly. You're not supposed to say Allahumma salli. You say it in your heart, right? You don't say it audibly. You say it in your heart. Another point which is important to mention is the dua between the two khutbahs. The dua between the two khutbahs, it is not sabit from a hadith that you raise your hands while doing the dua. You don't raise your hands when you do the dua between the two khutbahs. You do the dua in your heart. You don't do it audibly. So a lot of people you see when the imam sits down after the first khutbah, in between the two khutbahs, a lot of people raise their hands and make dua. Scholars say that you're not supposed to raise your hands. You're supposed to make dua in your heart. Right? Similarly, when you're doing the durood at the time where the imam says, Sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima, you do that in your heart. You don't do it audibly. And similarly, the dua between the two khutbahs, you don't raise your hands. You don't say it out loud, but you make dua in your heart. These are just a few very important points that a lot of people, right, they don't know. So I'll cover the Mustahabb times. Again, Fajr is prayed at the time of Isfar, when there's considerable amount of light in the horizon. Dhuhr is delayed during the summer, and it is prayed earlier during the winter, right? Asr is the same. Asr is delayed according to the Hanafi madhab. Maghrib, according to everybody, you pray right after sunset. And Isha Salah, it is delayed during the winter, and it is prayed early during the summertime. So these covers the Mustahab times of Salah.
Can
If
you?
brothers have any questions, they can ask.
Yeah, for the Isha prayer, can you break apart like when should the Fard be prayed and when should the Witr be prayed, and what's the proper timings for those, especially if you are trying to do Tahajjud, for example?
Yeah, the Fard for Isha, it is makruh to delay it until after midnight. So you should make sure you pray the Fard before midnight. In regards to Witr, the ulama, they mention, the fuqaha, they mention that if a person has a habit of waking up for tahajjud, and he knows that he can wake up for tahajjud, and he's not going to miss it, and he's not going to sleep all the way until fajr, then it will be preferable for him to delay his witr. He won't pray witr at the Isha Salah time, but he would delay it, right? So he'll go to sleep without praying his witr, he'll wake up, he'll pray his tahajjud, then he'll pray his witr after the tahajjud. But this is only for that person who knows that he can wake up for tahajjud. If he knows that I'm not going to wake up for tahajjud, I'm most likely going to miss it and I'm going to wake up during the fajr salah, then that person will pray his witr before going to sleep. Any other questions?
Tahajjud time will end as soon as Fajr comes in?
Yes.
And so what about the Sunnah Muakkada of Isha?
Yeah, that's also, you pray it after the fard. You don't pray it with the
So before midnight.
Yes. The fard and the Sunnah Muakkada is prayed before that.
Can you review the sunnahs of Jummah, like which ones are necessary and which ones are not necessary?
So what we hear, what is common that we know is that there's 12 rakats of Jummah. So there's 4 sunnah, then the 2 fard we pray with the imam, and then the 4 sunnah, and then 2 sunnah. So now which one are all of them mu'akkada? No. The 4 sunnah before the 2 fard and the 4 sunnah after the 2 fard are sunnah mu'akkada. The 2 sunnah all the way in the ending is sunnah ghayr mu'akkada. Remember we discussed sunnah mu'akkada and ghayr mu'akkada. You guys, anybody call the difference between the two?
Sunnah Muakkada is the Sunnah that's rarely left out by Rasulullah. Sunnah Ghayr Muakkada, he would.
Yes, sunnah mu'akkada Rasulullah would not leave out unless he had a valid excuse for leaving out. Sunnah ghayr mu'akkada, he would pray it sometimes, and sometimes he would leave it out even though there was no excuse, right? So the 2 sunnat in Jummah that's prayed in the ending is actually ghayr mu'akkada, it's not mu'akkada. Right?
One question.
Yes?
If you miss the first 4 rakat before Jummah, you have to make up or
Yeah, you'll make it up afterwards. Say for example, if you come to the masjid and you haven't prayed your sunnat, and the khutbah is going on, for example.
Right.
So you won't pray your sunnat, you'll listen to the khutbah, you'll pray the fard, and then you'll pray the 4 sunnah that's prayed after Jummah.
Right.
If you want, you could pray the 2 sunnah ghayr mu'akkada, and then all the way in the ending, you pray the sunnah that you missed.
What is that?
Yes. Right?
In some of the masajid, like especially those who follow Shafi, we don't even differentiate between whether this is Arabic or this is like a
Yeah, some places they give an English khutbah, or what is called,
like
right?
you don't even
The second adhan is given,
there is
and
no
then the
adhan.
bayan, this is how they do it. They give the second adhan, And then the English bayan, the English and the Arabic is mixed. Most masajid they do that.
A little bit.
That's against the sunnah. It's strictly against the sunnah because Sahaba, after the time of Rasulullah, if you read the history, they traveled to other places, and they traveled to places where they would not speak the language of that area. So some Sahaba, say for example, when they would give the talk, you could say they would give it in their language, but in the khutbah, they would give an Arabic khutbah. Some people, they use the excuse that, I can't understand the Arabic khutbah, so do it in English. That's not a valid excuse because the Sahaba, despite them giving the Jummah bayans in other places, other countries where Arabic was not their language, they didn't know Arabic, they would give the Arabic khutbah, they would give the 2 Arabic khutbahs. So that is the actual sunnah, right?
Yeah, most of the Shafis, they don't follow.
A lot of masajid in the city area, some in Long Island, that's how they do it. They do it in English.
Some they do that too, I saw.
Yeah, a lot of them they do that. It's very common.
Other states also, other states.
Yeah, very common, very common. A lot of them do that. The actual sunnah is to have the English as you do the second adhan, and then the 2 Arabic khutbahs.
Can you please explain the ruling, like when it's like inclement weather, the weather's bad, and the timing of the prayer shift, or you can pray the prayer early or combine them or something like that, or like what is that about?
Oh, Jama Bain Salatain, where you pray 2 salats during one time, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, like let's say if it's like snow or something and it's really hard to get to the masjid or something, and you can combine like Zuhr prayer and Asr prayer, or you could delay the
That will
Zuhr.
be discussed in detail in a future class, but according to the Hanafi madhab, you can't do that.
Okay.
According to the Hanafi madhab, you can't combine 2 prayers in one time.
And no, regardless of condition, right?
Yeah, you can't.
For the Jummah khutbah, when the Imam says Rasulullah, we just saw some in the heart, right?
Yes, even that, shade in the heart.
So that's only for after the second azan, or in the English one we have to also stay silent?
That's the thing, if they don't do the Arabic and they consider the English one, then the ruling would transfer to that now. For the whole duration of the English, we can't talk. That's the thing. I really don't understand it, honestly. There's some people like, they want to save time. It's like, it doesn't take that much time to do 2 Arabic khutbahs. Make it short. That's the sunnah. The Rasulullah said, make the Arabic khutbah short.
What necessitates a khutbah? Three lines of Arabic?
No, so scholars say, for the Imam, bare minimum amount of people, there's 3 people, and there's an Imam. Besides the Imam, there's the 3 people there. The khutbah, if the Imam just stands up and says Alhamdulillah, that will suffice.
Oh.
Right, I forgot the name of the Sahabi. He did that once, where he just said very brief, literally like a few seconds, and then he started his salah. So that will suffice.
So you don't.
There are other sunnah part of the khutbah that these certain acts are sunnah. This is Mustahabb, for example. Like one Mustahabb, for example, is mentioning the names of the 4 khulafa, mentioning Abu Bakr, the hadith of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Mentioning that on the Jummah khutbah is Mustahabb. So there's a lot to it. Maybe we'll discuss that in future class when we get to the discussion about Jummah. Any other questions, Brother Saf? Khayr, inshallah. Jazakallah khayran for your time, brothers. Inshallah. Next week, we'll start on the faraid of salat. Inshallah.
Is this every Friday?
Yeah, every Friday.